1804. Thomas Jefferson has just bought the Louisiana Purchase from France for $15 million, doubling the size of the United States. Settlers begin to move into this new territory in large groups, blazing trails and settling where they find fertile land to later establish towns and eventually their own government. Missouri was just beyond the Mississippi River, and in 1817 it became the first state west of the Mississippi River to apply for statehood. As the petition entered Congress, a New York representative proposed an amendment to prohibit slavery in Missouri. However, the Senate struck down the bill and Missouri applied again for statehood in 1820. People had differing views over whether it should be a slave or free state, which sparked a large debate and divided the nation. The North was a very commercial and industry region. It prospered on free wage labor, and there was a strong abolitionist movement. On the other hand, slavery was an essential part of the Southern agricultural economy. These cultural and economical differences led to disagreements on the subject of slavery, as the Western territory developed into states. This animosity is well displayed in a poem written in 1820 by Timothy Claimwright, who lived in Maine. He writes,
"If the South will not yield, to the West be it known, that Maine will declare for a king of her own, and 300,000 of freemen demand the justice bestowed on each state in the land."
The poem then continues to characterize slavery as immoral and highlight the North's disdain for its spread into the West. It depicts the North view that Missouri should not enter the Union as a slave state, which contradicted the desires of the South. The Missourians themselves did want slavery, as it would boost their economy. Slavery had been a long issue of disagreement in Congress between the North and the South, yet this topic became once again at the forefront of discussions in Congress with Missouri's petition to join the Union, because there was an equal number of slave and free states creating a balance of power, and Missouri threatened this. In fact, Thomas Jefferson later noted that in the gloomiest moment of the Revolutionary War, he never had any apprehensions equal to that he felt from that controversy. Henry Clay, known as the Great Pacifier, proposed a compromise in which Missouri would enter the Union as a slave state, and Maine would break off from Massachusetts and enter the Union as a free state. He also proposed that there be an imaginary boundary on the southern border of Missouri, the 36-30-minute latitude line, where all future states above the line would be free, and future states below the line could have slavery. James Putnam, a New York senator at the time, recounts Clay's role in the compromise in a letter to the president in 1854, writing that Clay called upon the country to make another sacrifice upon the altar of patriotism. Clay helped the North and the South find common ground. However, this compromise ended up separating the two regions more than ever before. The line provided a legal border between free North and slave South. In fact, Thomas Jefferson expresses his feelings about the compromise line in a letter to John Holmes, stating,
"But this momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. A geographical line, coinciding from marked principle, moral and political, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men, will never be obliterated, and every new irritation will mark it deeper and deeper."
Jefferson's views on this line being a true separation were shared by many others throughout the nation. This separation was not only inherent in the minds of the people in these different regions, but also in Congress. The Missouri Compromise did not dissipate the tensions and debates over slavery in Congress. Just 34 years later, the Missouri Compromise was called into question as there was a new debate over the place of slavery in the entry of Nebraska into the Union. The South was afraid that Nebraska would enter as a free state, and so Stephen Douglas proposed that the state be split into Nebraska and Kansas, and each would allow popular sovereignty to decide whether slavery had a place in their states or not. This became known as the Kansas-Nebraska Act, yet this contradicted the Missouri Compromise because slavery was allowed into territories that had previously been free. Several senators, such as Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner, became heated over this and expressed their disapproval of the violation of the Missouri Compromise. However, tempers were high in Congress, and Sumner was heavily beaten by South Carolina Representative Preston Brooks for his disapproving comments on using popular sovereignty to decide if there would be slavery. Congressmen were forced to take sides, and the men from the North and South tended to have differing opinions on a multitude of issues. This tension continued as 3 years later the issue of slavery became the center of government discussions once again with the Dred Scott court case. The court case comprised of Dred Scott, a slave who had mostly worked in Missouri before working for 4 years in free territories with his master. Upon his return to Missouri, he sued his master for freedom because of being a slave in free territories for many years. This case went all the way to the Supreme Court, where they ultimately found that Dred Scott was to remain a slave.
How did the North and South react?
In the North, legislatures and Republican politicians responded to the Dred Scott decision by questioning whether this was a Supreme Court decision that they should abide by. In the Southern white press, it was said that slave owners should keep their slaves away from political meetings because the more slaves gather around these political meetings, the more they're going to become aware of the political crisis over slavery. Thus, this divide in ideologies due to Dred Scott decision and declaring the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional further sectioned the U.S. into the North and the South.
In this case, the Supreme Court practically declared the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional and displayed that Congress had no power to stop the spread of slavery. This angered many Northerners, which strengthened and popularized the anti-slavery movement. The abolitionists' refusal to stand by and allow slavery to continue motivated South Carolina's secession from the Union in 1860 and later the secession of many Southern states. Therefore, the Missouri Compromise was a critical part in the division of the United States and the start of the Civil War.